Hello and most welcome to 1221, and I will continue with the article started in 1220, and there we discussed the reference frames. And this is an often ignored subject because it is often felt to be incredibly abstract. I would say, especially since ignoring it is encouraged nowadays. We ignore it, we feel that the consequences will be the same, whether whatever sort of reference frame we have, it will still amount to the same thing. This is the elimination of the reference frames, where they can be transferred to each other, and that transferal in itself leads to the idea that whatever reference frame we choose, they will always amount to the same. This is not the case at all, and it will lead to an idea of cause and effect that is alien to what is real. We cannot see the choice of reference frame as a choice we make anymore, but we still do make it, and thereby enters a huge level of subjectivity. I would say there is no exaggeration to say that modern day is the epiphany of subjectivity, where everyone chooses their own points of reference, and them not even being aware of choosing a point of reference. I would say that makes it even more dangerous. I will add here a take from Ashish Dalela. It's called The Quantum Understanding of Karma. This view of causality is pervasive across many Eastern philosophies, and it's called karma. The mystical or religious aspects of this theory is how one can break the cycle of cause and effect consequence, but it depends on a firm understanding of this cycle itself. The cycle of action and reaction is the foundation on which true religion is built, and in that sense, the foundation of religion is a scientific understanding of natural causality, not merely faith. Science pertains to the law of cause and effect consequence, while religion is how to get out of this law. In other words, the law of material nature can be overcome by performing certain types of action which have an effect but no consequences. Insofar as the effect follows the cause, this is still science. But insofar as the consequences are not created, it is religion. When religion is disconnected from an understanding of natural causality, then numerous faiths are created. When religion is based on this causality, there is no faith, only a scientific understanding of how natural causality works and how it can be overcome. Can coordinate systems be physically real? I will now return to the quantum problem and outline some ideas about the nature of space-time and how the modern ideas in science must be revised to create a new notion of causality. As we have seen, causality requires pairwise entanglement of objects, and this entanglement requires us to place these interacting objects in the same coordinate systems. Objects that don't interact or interact pairwise in separate groups can have different coordinate frames. I am thus not claiming that there is only one reference frame, but that whenever a causal interaction occurs, a reference frame shared between a source and receiver must be used, because on this frame we can speak about structure. The universe is therefore not arbitrary coordinate frames. Rather, there are many coordinate frames within which different pairwise interaction occur. If any object could interact with any other object, then all these objects would be in a single, fixed and universal coordinate frame. Either way, coordinate systems are not arbitrary. Rather, they have to be defined through causal interactions in which the interacting objects use the same coordinate system. As this causality is widened, we arrive at a single universal coordinate frame. This frame represents the universal space-time. If light is emitted from an object and then travels to another object, then the source and destination can view this transaction differently. If, however, the two systems have to be entangled before the light can be emitted or absorbed, and the effects of this emission or absorption depends on the structural relation between the two, then the source and destination must reside in the same coordinate system throughout their transaction. The use of different coordinate systems at the source or destination would fail to explain the observations, because the structure would itself be described differently. The conventional wisdom in physics states that coordinate systems are simply our way of observing the world and have nothing to do with the world itself. The solution to the above problems entails that we recognize this coordinate system as a physically real entity. Since the coordinate system exists in the observer, although it is not an object, recognizing the reality of coordinate systems would entail a new kind of physical entity that, although already used in physics, is not yet treated as a physically real entity. The coordinate system becomes the basis on which events are ordered. Essentially, the succession of events is nothing other than the space-time structure. And this space-time structure can be known if we know the material destinies. Since the destinies are constantly being created through actions, the space-time structure is also being created. The events in the distant future are therefore being created right now, but they will manifest much later. Space-time is not a static entity as the currently dominant block universe view assumes. Rather, events in space-time produce more space-time, which appears later, When the consequences of previous actions are destroyed, the past ceases to exist materially. Until those consequences are not realized, the past is materially real. Since the future is produced from the present, it is materially real until it is realized and becomes the present. In one sense, past, present, and future are all real. In another sense, they are all unreal. This reality and unreality creates problems for philosophers, but these problems are resolved when we take the cause-effect consequence cycle into account. We have seen why space-time, or the method of ordering events, is not an object, that is, in the sense of being sensually perceivable. We have also seen above that this space-time must be materially real to create causality. I will now discuss how this material reality is distinct from the notion of material objects in the current science. Suppose that we are ordering a collection of particles based on mass. We might then label a particular object as the fifth object in a collection by mass. If the same collection were then ordered based on momentum, frequency, size, etc., the ordinal position could change. The ordinal position of an object, therefore, changes based on how we order the objects, namely based on mass, momentum, frequency, size, etc. The method of ordering objects, therefore, has an effect on the objects, namely that it changes their ordinal position. If the ordinal position presented an empirical phenomenon, then the observed order of objects would entail a preferred choice of coordinate system. Coordinate systems are useful constructs for ordering events, and this ordering is essentially a concept which allows us to sequence the events into an order. It follows that the space-time of events which we use to order events, but which we cannot perceive sensually, is a concept by which ordering is performed. There are innumerable coordinate frames because there are innumerable concepts by which we can order events. In one case, the order may be created by frequency, while in another by momentum. We can also have events ordered first by momentum and then by frequency. The space-time, therefore, need not to be described as a set of points or events, which are essentially effects of ordering. We can also describe space-time as the method of ordering. The senses of the observer are the methods of ordering. The eye, for example, can order by color, size, form, distance, etc. The ear similarly will order by tone, pitch, phase, distance, etc. The skin likewise orders based on temperature, roughness, hardness, etc. There can be many orders between the properties measured by a sense and orders between the use of senses themselves. For instance, we can order first by form, then by size, and then by color. Or we can order by form, then by taste, and then by touch, etc. Accordingly, the senses of the observer produce an observer-unique coordinate frame for ordering events. We can also create properties that combine two or more of the above properties. These coordinate frames are choices of the observer, and different observers can use different conceptual reference frames, each of which defines the properties in terms of which we will order objects, thereby creating different languages for describing the same world. However, when we communicate with other observers, we must use the same language. In that sense, two observers must be situated in the same coordinate frame in order to exchange information. The so-called entanglement of systems is nothing other than the use of a shared convention for ordering events. The problem of quantum entanglement can therefore be simply defined as the use of a shared language. Before information can be exchanged, the language of exchange must be defined. These conventions are widely employed even in current science. For example, before we can compute the gravitational effect on two masses, we must agree to describe the mass either in terms of kilograms or pounds. If Earth uses the pound standard and I use the kilogram standard, the law would only produce erroneous results. Similarly, we must agree on the definition of all physical properties. how they would be measured and the order in which they would be measured. In classical physics, we assume that if we hold different standards, we may not be able to communicate our results to other observers, but we would still be able to do scientific experiments by ourselves. In quantum physics, we must suppose that we cannot even perform an experiment unless a shared convention of ordering facts has been previously defined, because the interacting objects can be different frames. We may disagree on the ideas shared in communication, but we must agree on the language used in communication, even to begin disagreeing with the ideas. So, without establishing which reference frame you are using, there would be very hard even to disagree. No proper disagreement can be. No establishing of viewpoints, arguments are in that case possible. Quantum theory, the quantum event ordering problem. The quantum event ordering problem can thus be reduced to a specific coordinate system choice, which can then be reduced to the concepts that are used for ordering, which can then be reduced to the methods of perception in the observers. Now we come to a radical conclusion, which is that the order of events you perceive depends on your methods of perception. Individuals who have different methods cannot agree on the event order. Such individuals would not even be able to communicate with each other. This is no longer a description of a social fact, often observed in debates where two people with radically different languages cannot communicate, but also a description of a physical phenomenon where object interactions depend on the use of shared conventions. Quantum theory permits the use of different languages, which is why this fact is important for quantum phenomena. For example, quantum theory allows the same wave function to be represented in many different bases, each of which has a different event order. The meaning through such expressions can be the same, but the order in which the meaning is expressed through words can differ. The world is thus not fixed, and the observer is not just a spectator of the events that occur independent of the observer. Rather, the observer interferes with the world by choosing a coordinate frame. The hidden variable in quantum theory is the choice of a coordinate system which is not an object or a physical property, but a concept by which we organize the world in our senses and the mind. The standard interpretation of quantum theory describes the quantum event as a consequence of a collapse, which John von Neumann called the choice of consciousness. Since such a choice has to be made with each event, the order in quantum theory cannot be explained except by postulating an infinite succession of choices. However, this problem disappears if the event order is natural and indicated by a coordinate system choice. In other words, quantum events occur in a particular order if they are the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth events in the chosen coordinate system. The infinite choices of consciousness in the collapse interpretation become a single choice of coordinate system, and this choice can be objective, although not an object. As seen above, the method of ordering objects within a collection exists as a concept, namely the properties of mass, momentum, frequency, etc. If such concepts were accorded reality in science, in the specific sense that they help us to order the objects and give them ordinal positions, then a new kind of physical entity, that is, a concept, would be causally efficacious, because it will explain the observed event order. Ordering and boundaries. In classical physics, all coordinate systems are global. That is, if you choose a coordinate system, then you must apply it to all objects in the universe. A different observer can choose a different coordinate system and order the objects differently. The choice of the coordinate systems, therefore, has no effect on the world, because multiple ways of ordering are simultaneously permitted. Since the alternative choices can conflict with each other, the existence of such a global choice entails that these choices have no physical relevance. Arbitrary choices thus naturally lead to the quantum problem, because we cannot globally choose a coordinate system and expect it to affect the entire universe. For such choices to be causally efficacious, the scope of the coordinate system must be limited. Such choices now represent a local space-time, which orders the events locally rather than globally. To address the quantum problem, we must postulate that the space-time that order events is local, which orders the events locally rather than globally. To address the quantum problem, we must postulate that the space-time that order events is local, and its effects exists within a boundary. And the boundary is, what local setting do you choose? It will change the ordering. If you choose XYZ, it will be one ordering. If you choose a different reference system, it will be instantaneously different. And it's the choice of reference frames which is the observer. And once you choose a reference frame, there is a collapse. So it's objective, but it's still not an object. To make a short recap. Effectively, the resolution of the quantum problem now requires the hypothesis of a new kind of physical entity, a boundary, which orders events within the boundary. The observed event order is now explained as an effect of the boundary. The boundary therefore is therefore the cause, and the event order is the effect. The boundary is a physical entity, and yet it may not always be an observable entity. That is, an object. The boundary therefore cannot be sensually perceived, although its effect on the sensations can be perceived. This boundary represents a local coordinate system which can be conceived as a physical entity, although not an object in the conventional sense of particles. By changing the boundary, the event order can be objectively altered. The form of the boundary, therefore, represents a physical property with empirical consequences. Hierarchical space-time. Once we recognize that boundaries are real physical entities, the universe can be segmented into larger and larger boundaries. The largest boundary would then order the next smaller boundaries within it, each of which will then order the subsequent smaller boundaries within each boundaries, and so forth. Each such boundary will represent a concept or a method of ordering, which effectively gives the boundary itself an ordinal position within the larger boundary. This is what I call hierarchical space-time. This type of space-time is analogous to the everyday description of space-time, in which the Earth is divided into countries, which are divided into states, which are divided into cities, which are divided into localities, etc. Time, similarly, is divided hierarchically into years, months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. The intuitions underlying this hierarchical space-time therefore exist within our everyday world, although they have been disregarded in modern science. By presenting the universe uniformly. A hierarchical universe is not uniform because there isn't a single coordinate system for the entire universe. Rather, the universe is divided into smaller domains, each of which represents a different way of ordering events within that space-time domain. General relativity is based on the premise that coordinate systems are fictions of our minds, that the choice of such a coordinate system presents no effect on nature. Such coordinate systems are also supposed to be global, which essentially overlooks how a coordinate system could actually affect matter. Such equivalence is also contradictory to quantum theory. By rejecting such equivalence, we can not only resolve the quantum problem, but also find a new description. Insights into the mind-body problem. The above description also presents interesting possibilities for resolving the age-old mind-body problem that Descartes created. The body in question here is material objects, and the mind is the space-time coordinate system that orders these objects. Changing the coordinate system automatically reorders the objects without a causal force affecting these objects. The interaction between space-time and matter is therefore not due to force, but due to a mathematical property of space-time in which events occur in the order given by the space-time structure, and changing this structure changes the events. The mind cannot be perceived like the objects are perceived, just as space and time cannot be perceived. However, the effects of space and time, as the ordered appearance and disappearance of events, can be perceived. In that sense, mind is a concept which can be theoretically described in science, although not seen or touched. This also opens science to the natural description of paranormal or psychic phenomena in which the mind controls the material world by simply changing the local coordinate system, which then reorders the events. In current science, these coordinate systems remain in our minds and have no effect on the world. In a new science, such coordinate systems would be physical boundaries or forms that change the world. The mechanism of such interaction would now be easily explicable in physical terms and would no longer remain mysterious. Of course, the ability to apply our mental coordinate system to the world would still involve a specialized ability, but this ability would now involve a causal interaction between our internal and external coordinate systems. Once coordinate systems are recognized as real physical entities, a completely new kind of science that manipulates matter by changing such coordinate systems would now be conceivable. Anyone who has the ability to rethink the world and then apply the thought to the world would also be able to change the world. This ability presents significantly different levels of scientific and technological advance, although that advance depends on the development of mental capacities rather than physical instruments. Envisioning a new science. The mind controls the body, and the body is then used to control the material objects. But when the mind's control over the body is disregarded, then we falsely come to the conclusion that the world is being controlled by the body. A push or pull model of causality is then developed, modeled after the body's ability to push and pull the material objects. This is what present science tries to do. Since the mind's effect on the body was originally disregarded in science, inducting the mind back into the physical world appears incredibly difficult, simply because the mind appears incompatible with the nature of the physical world as envisioned in science. This lacuna then appears in physics itself, in our inability to explain the phenomena purely based on physical properties. If, however, we begin with the intuitively accessible fact that the mind controls the body, then finding the path for this interaction presents us with a new kind of science and technology. This science would reject most of the established principles of modern science, but it will explain how the mind controls the body and present a new way of controlling the world through the mind. Quantum theory can be seen as a vista to this new kind of science, provided we are prepared to adopt a new way of thinking. This goes to show that we are too eager or too quick to enter in a reference frame. And I would say there are 4 reasons for that. We are habituated by always going into the same reference frame, individually, subjectively. This becomes a habit, it's a bias that always regard or judge everyone else's judgments on themselves from this perspective, and making the erroneous conclusion that we share reference frames. The third one being this lacks energy, and the very lack of energy keeps us stuck in this model. And I think this is very close to Plato and his cave. You are literally stuck in a mode of being that takes away a lot of your energy, and therefore you will be less able to change the mode you're in, the attitude or the Stimmung as Heidegger would have it. That Stimmung makes for a reduction in creativity, thinking and intellectual power. And I mentioned many times before, the intellectual power has decreased during the decades and also the centuries since Newton's Principia of 1689. The fourth reason is we are creatures of habit, and as soon as we open our eyes in the morning, we put the reference frame and we're not able to put in a little waiting, an edge, a little moment for pause before the mind instantly gets stuck in the same reference point of view. Therefore, we never notice the different reference points of use. This is something that Ian McGilchrist says is the most characteristic of autism, or different stages going into autism. The absolute inability to have an inner life. And an inner life is the inner point of reference, being able to change that. If you cannot change it, everything is on the outside. And what makes sense there is going to be the last thing, the conclusion. If everything is outside, there is no use of an inner self. You have no use for change in focal setting or any of those features. You will be permanently stuck and you will be out of sync, because before you are even able to perceive reality, you will push a reference frame automatically, unbeknownst to yourself, and this automatic behavior is the same as being non-aware, lacking perception, lacking consciousness. And you will obviously be like Daniel Dennett. You will be a materialized person in a very real way, or really down to matter way. You will have no choice. You will not be able to make any choices, because how can you make choices if you can't change the reference scheme? It's not how the individual way of looking at things and the global take are here coming to the same, or crossing, making a cross section. Because we previously, many lectures ago, that would be 2.5, 3 years ago, we discussed widely the inertial point of reference, which is so important for the Newtonian idea of an absolute global perspective, where all the different reference frames are possible to summarize into one single reference view. That's a huge reduction, and of course that was concluded by Newton himself, because this is how he perceived the whole thing. He was also stuck in this only one possibility of realizing, understanding, or giving sense to the world. And once you're stuck in that, there is no turning back, or it's very hard to make the effort, because the energy given to you in a limited sense, when you don't have any choice, when everything is external to you, you have no sense of self. There is literally no free will, because if you can't choose the reference system, the coordinate system, you cannot do a different ordinality. you are stuck with cardinality. That cardinality is bound to be the same construction. This is very similar to what Ian McGilchrist calls representations. Well, that was the end of 1221. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.